Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the XPRIZE Carbon Removal Virtual Team Summit Air Track session. I'm Roopa Dandamudi. I manage team relations for the prize. I'm joined here with Nikki Batchelor, who is our prize director, and Michael Leach, who's our technical director, Marcus Extevor, who's our VP of Energy and Climate, may be joining later. He's has another commitment at the time. I'd like to go ahead and get us started. We have a great panel of speakers today. Just a quick rundown of the agenda is we're going to spend about half an hour with our speakers, a half an hour of Q&A, and then we will follow with a breakout session to allow all of you to network with each other and rotate around to different rooms, introduce yourselves to each other, share your elevator pitch. We've gotten some good feedback on those sessions so far, so hopefully you'll find them useful. So I just want to introduce our great speakers that have joined us today. Thank you for making the time. We have Holly Kruta, who's Executive Director at the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources, and she's also one of our XPRIZE judges. She also served as a judge on our previous prize, the NRG COSIA Carbon XPRIZE, so we're happy to have her here today. John Larsen, Director of Rhodium Group, and Francis Wang, who's Program Manager of the Carbon Dioxide Removal Program at Climeworks Foundation. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Holly to get us started.
Thanks, Roopa. Hi, everyone. Glad to talk to you today. Really appreciate your interest in the competition. So I was asked to talk today a little bit about the CO2 storage side. So this is the air track. I'm going to focus on geologic storage, so underground storage, and share a little bit about what we have done in Wyoming and at the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources, and hopefully that will be helpful to you as you think about how to approach CO2 storage. So this could be a challenging area for some folks. So I would say you're going to have to look at larger streams. So 1,000 tons per year is not going to be sufficient to get a whole well. So depending if your demonstration is of that scale, it probably isn't going to make a lot of sense for you to get your own well. So you're going to have to look for other CO2 storage opportunities. There are a few projects ongoing, so around the world, but not too many. So let me talk a little bit about I think most of you are probably aware, but just in case, I think I better make sure I cover the big picture. But what we're talking about is the injection of carbon dioxide into the subsurface. We have to inject at least 3,000 feet below the surface, because that is where carbon dioxide becomes the pressure is high enough that it is a supercritical fluid. So when you inject to those depths, you have to pressurize the CO2 at the surface, then it gets injected. And I see the comments, geological sequestration is not the only pathway. That's just what I was asked to talk about. So absolutely not the only option here. But if you are pursuing that geologic storage, you will need to work to develop a well that is at depths sufficient for the CO2 to be a supercritical fluid, and that's at least 3,000 feet. In the U.S., I would say we're the most advanced on the storage side, although there's great work actually in the North Sea off of Norway. There's been CO2 injection for nearly 20 years. I think they were at about 17 years and 20 million tons of CO2. So large project. The most CO2 that's been injected in the subsurface around the world is associated with enhanced oil recovery. I do think that's allowed under the competition, but you just have to calculate the overall carbon footprint. So that would be certainly something to consider, as there's massive ongoing operations where CO2 is being injected in the US, particularly in states like Texas and Wyoming. If you're looking at CO2 injection into dedicated storage or into saline aquifers, so not for enhanced oil recovery, I would point you to, in the US, 2 states. Well, I'll point you to one project. There's a project in Illinois that's ongoing now that is injecting CO2 into saline aquifer. I think they're up to about over 1 million tons now. There's the Quest project in Alberta, Canada. So those could potentially be entities you could outreach to tie in with their existing operations. If you are looking for designing your own well or getting a new well, there are 2 states you could. So we have these. Let's see, where should I start? The permitting is focused on. It's called Class 6 well permitting, and it's focused on, and it's under the water program at the Environmental Protection Agency in the US, the EPA. And so the federal EPA oversees and awards permits for Class 6 wells, except in 2 states, that's North Dakota and Wyoming. And in those states, we have primacy, which means our local, in the case of Wyoming, the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ, can permit those grants. So if you did pursue that option, you would not be the first, at least in Wyoming or North Dakota. We both have applications for Class 6 wells that have been submitted for CO2 storage. So those could be opportunities as well. I would also point you to, there's going to be a lot happening in the US in the next couple of years. The infrastructure package has, that you may have heard of, that passed, has $2.5 billion for CCUS hubs. So that might be an opportunity to look where those hubs are being placed and to see if there's any opportunity to tie in with one of those hubs. I'll just tell you, nothing's happened yet, but certainly in Wyoming, we're going to be trying to compete for federal funding to build one of those hubs. And one of our concepts would be to go ahead and permit wells and permit and actually construct the wells, drill them, and then when CO2, whether it's CO2 removal or CO2 capture projects show up, they can just plug in and inject their CO2. So it's just an idea, but it could move relatively quickly as that infrastructure funding is released for use. So something else to think about. I would say there are all kinds of resources available on CO2 storage in the subsurface, but particularly, I think World Resources Institute, Global CCS Institute have done some work on stakeholder outreach and how to talk to communities for these kind of projects. And certainly it's something we're working on here at the School of Energy Resources. We're actually drilling a well, which is Class 1, which means it's just for testing, and we're going to convert it to a Class 6 well, and we're drilling over the holidays. So our Christmas cards or our holiday cards from School of Energy Resources say Jingle Bells Holiday Wells, and so that's what we're doing over the holidays here, unfortunately. But anyway, the key to successful subsurface injection really is engaging with the local public extensively. And so if you choose to join up with a project, you find a CCS hub, you find a CO2 injector you can work with, that you probably would want to be part of that process. But generally, I would say on the technical side, the risks are covered by the Class 6 permitting. So generally, we feel that these wells will be safe and effective, and you can have confidence that if you're working with someone who has a Class 6 permit and they're going to inject CO2 into the subsurface, that they have been through a very rigorous process to get that permit awarded to them. So, and then I would just make a pitch to look at Wyoming. We have a lot going for us in that we have the least populated state in the US. We have been working on CO2 storage rules and making this an attractive place for investment in for decades in the state, both through the Wyoming legislature and then the work that's done here at the University of Wyoming. So I hope that you will, as you look at opportunities, consider And that's not just for CO2 storage. I would say, yes, go Pokes, yay. I would say that we are really interested in building up a carbon removal industry here in the state. And so we are interested in the other sectors. Like I said, I was asked to talk about air and geologic CO2 storage today, but we're interested in all the above, soil storage and other options. So thank you so much. And Roopa, with that, I'm going to stop talking now.
Okay, thank you so much, Holly. Great. I'm going to hand it over to John Larsen next.
Thanks, Roopa. Hey, everybody. John Larsen, I direct U.S. energy research at the Rhodium Group. We're an independent research firm that where my team spends most of our time looking at ways to accelerate decarbonization of the U.S. energy system and economy, and also how to scale up emerging clean technologies like all of the carbon dioxide removal options that you folks are exploring. So it's great to be here today on such a great panel with Francis and Holly. I thought, so most of our work, or at least most of the time, the work that I'm developing and working on is US focused. So I was going to spend most of my remarks talking about the US context, but obviously this challenge, both of climate change and scaling up carbon dioxide removal, is definitely a global one. And I think it's just worth kind of always recentering ourselves around the end game here, which is, if you look at the IPCC reports, we're talking about if everything goes right on decarbonizing other sectors, we may still need 10 to 20 gigatons of carbon dioxide removal annually by mid-century around the world. And from our estimates, that about 10 to 25% of that could occur in the United States. That is huge. Just to put that in context, we're talking about carbon dioxide removal by mid-century that's roughly equivalent to running all of the emissions from every large stationary source in America, every factory, and every power plant in reverse on an annual basis. More importantly, it took more than a century to build out all of those factories and power plants I was just talking about that are in place today, and we've got basically 30 years to get everything going up again in the context of carbon dioxide removal. So, the challenge is quite large, but I still think it's quite doable with the right effort and I think the right attention and investment in innovation. So thanks all of you for spending a lot of your time and mental capacity on this problem. Obviously, carbon dioxide removal is one key technology suite among many that we're going to need to get to net zero in the US and globally. Ultimately, things like direct air capture will depend on the success or failure, or the role of direct air capture and carbon dioxide removal is going to depend on the success or failure of other technologies and how they're applied to decarbonization. So for example, it's pretty common convention that, step one, clean the electric power sector up and decarbonize that, get that to zero. Step two, electrify everything else. Well, what if we don't get fully to zero in the power sector? Or what if we don't electrify fast enough? The short answer is we're going to have to find tons elsewhere. And the real swing capacity here is going to be carbon dioxide removal. So, we at Rhodium definitely see CDR across the board as kind of a critical place to maintain as much optionality as possible for getting to net zero. Because some other options either may not pan out at all or won't scale fast enough to help contribute to the ultimate end game here. When it comes to CDR and making sure that it is affordable and readily available everywhere we need it around the world in time, the most important thing from our view is getting costs down as fast as possible. When you're at lab scale or bench scale, obviously it's a long ways off to get to something close to like 50 to 100 bucks a ton on an annualized basis, but that's ultimately where all of this needs to be driving towards, because if it's not affordable, CDR is just not going to scale. And I want to just laud the XPRIZE Foundation for setting up this prize, because that's obviously a big part of what this whole exercise around the prize is about. So thank you for devoting all the attention to it. Holly mentioned the infrastructure bill that just passed in Congress. It's worth noting that there's a whole bunch of new federal money and federal programs that will be refocusing and ramping up anew to focus on carbon dioxide removal and some of the related necessary technologies like CO2 infrastructure, injection, and sites characterization for storage, and a lot of the other kind of overlapping technology needs. And that's super exciting. I think there is going to be more money and more federal effort in the space in the coming, few years than we've ever seen. And that's going to go a long way to getting demonstration projects off the ground and getting some of the first of a kind options up and running and steel in the ground. But that's just the first inning for all of this. Even if costs do decline dramatically for CDR, it's not going to scale without a market and without robust demand at the scale, at the gigaton scale in the long run here for carbon removal services, or else all of these efforts are going to plateau. They're not going to be able to scale because nobody's going to want carbon dioxide removal. And I think, the activities in the private sector, companies like Stripe and other technology firms that are actually trying to prime the market and get at least an initial set of revenue streams for CDR vendors available is critical to getting things started. But there's nowhere near enough CO2 demand or carbon dioxide removal demand from that set of actors to get us where we need to go. And at the end of the day, this is where some sort of serious set of state and federal policies are going to be needed to get where we need to go on ultimate gigaton scale CDR. I would note that another bill currently in the doldrums in Congress, the Build Back Better Act, would go a long way to adding additional demand for carbon dioxide removal in America. So there's a few different ways that could work. There's federal procurement investment around low carbon building materials and other things, and even CDR that could be really useful, again, for market priming. But more importantly, there is a $180 per ton direct air capture tax credit when it's coupled with geologic storage that could be really, really meaningful for getting serious megaton scale projects off the ground. So watch the space, because hopefully something will pass the Senate that will ultimately help really start to build an honest to goodness commercial scale market for CDR in America. There's also other stuff in the bill around agricultural carbon dioxide removal programs. So there's a lot of different opportunities there. Even with cheap CDR and real demand, don't underestimate non-cost barriers to deployment. So these are, Holly, I think, spent her 10 minutes focused squarely on some of these, which I think is really important, which is how are you actually going to get that CO2 where it needs to be to make it stop damaging the climate? And things, as mundane as siting and permitting could ultimately make or break a lot of this. Infrastructure availability is another one, making sure that everybody who needs it has access to affordable geologic storage and access to any information to find the best, most suitable storage sites is going to be huge. Supply chain bottlenecks for the actual inputs and feedstocks into carbon dioxide removal machines. Access to all the affordable clean energy we're going to need to run this stuff are all other things that are going to be needed to get tackled at scale if we're going to get there. And this is while we're trying to decarbonize the entire energy system on the supply side. So I'm not trying to be too negative here. I'm just trying to help everybody appreciate the challenge ahead and the scale. And so I hope everybody not only puts their all into their efforts here on the prize, but also thinks ahead to how their solutions are going to fit in this bigger space and how we're going to get from here to net zero in a timely fashion. So with that, I wanted to thank everybody again for your time, and I look forward to Q&A.
Great, thanks so much, John. I'm going to hand it off to Francis next.
Great, thanks, Roopa. I actually do have a slide deck, so I will stay off camera and share the slides with you. All right, are we in good shape there? Can you see? Okay. Roopa?
We can see.
Sorry,
Okay,
I was on mute.
awesome.
Yes, we can see.
No worries. Okay, great. So hi, everybody. My name is Francis, and I am part of Climeworks. It is a philanthropic platform, and we generally provide grants to address gaps in science and governance to accelerate promising solutions to scale. Today, our grant making is around $1 billion across 50 countries, and CDR is one of the 10 programmatic areas at Climeworks. We don't typically fund private sector companies, which is why I'm super grateful that XPRIZE is filling this very important gap. Our funding is categorized into mainly 2 buckets. So we fund basic science, so things like modeling removal potentials for climate policy, and the other is around governance, which include policy advocacy and education, communications and social perception, and international removal conversations. And I've been asked to focus my talk on the last of the 2 areas, so the social perception and the regulatory landscape outside of the United States. But very quickly, these 2 graphs show the potential support for direct air capture year on year from the US and the UK government. And as you can see, prior to 2019, there was very limited support for research. And the current support we're seeing for direct air capture is the result of tireless education and outreach by the stakeholders, where effective messaging and communications are particularly catalytic for the field. So on that topic of messaging comms, I will share primarily the results of 3 large N voter polls that we did. So 2 are at the national level, focused either on direct air capture and CDR respectively. And 1 is at the local level, which is done at the Kern County and the Delta region in California. It is focused on carbon capture and storage, but it does have implications for project level direct air capture deployment in these regions. The overarching findings are not surprising. While over half of their surveyed voters support CDR or DAC, their understanding of what it is and how it works is relatively low. After receiving a tailored messaging about the technology itself, the favorability for these technology increases across the board for voters across the political spectrum and across racial and age groups. You can see the shift from the red to the blue in the graph. This shows basically that a modest amount of education may lead to an increased public support. People also especially expressed strong positive reaction to the discussion of how direct air capture increases jobs and how it is supported by a majority of scientists. Generally, the survey identified concerns that are common towards industrial projects, such as concerns around health and air quality. The survey individuals are also worried how this would impact solar wind deployment, given the limited funding available for climate in general. In addition, there is a concern that direct air capture would perpetuate the use of fossil fuels through EOR, or because of the moral hazard and delayed mitigation. This is the largest concern that we've seen from, in particular, environmental justice communities, because of the historic injustice the fossil fuel companies have committed against the marginalized communities. So to reach scale, it is important for the DAC industry to clearly demonstrate its allyship to meaningful climate action, because there are many examples where the world decides not to pursue a technology because it's antithesis to social morality. So aligning with fossil interests may not be very helpful in the long run, where DAC deployment requires widespread social acceptance. So on that point, I just want to show some examples where DAC is raising concerns in the EJ community that may eventually have implications on project development. So in May this year, the White House EJ Advisory Council released its final recommendation, where it noted DAC and CCS are not compatible with environmental justice objectives. In July, 500 mostly grassroots organizations published letters urging the lawmakers to reject CCS, where direct air capture is also mentioned in the same letter. And in December, we see the initial response or acknowledgement to these concerns formally through the request for information from the Department of Energy in the US, where Secretary Granholm especially referenced environmental justice and concerns from historically marginalized communities. The DOE is looking to require submissions of EJ-related information as part of the project proposals. In the public dialogue, DAC is often lumped together with CCS, whereas in reality, as we know, DAC clearly serves a different role in climate action. It is compatible with renewable energy and often don't require large infrastructure, but it's unclear whether there is that thorough understanding of the difference outside of the CDR community. And we know from polling that education helps. So outreach coupled with responsible action will likely reduce community resistance, which could be beneficial for the scale up in the long run. So in the message testing, the posters found it's helpful to emphasize that, like many technologies, carbon removal and direct air capture can be done responsibly or irresponsibly. Since we need CDR to have a safe planet, we should develop and follow guidelines to ensure responsible CDR that, in particular, creates jobs and benefits the economy. And like I mentioned, there's still quite a bit of confusion around the source of CO2, which can be detrimental because DAC is more expensive in the marketplace. So it's always helpful to reinforce that difference between DAC and other types of carbon capture in your outreach and communications. The message testing also found a helpful framing using both and. For example, how that works in reality is you could discuss mitigation as a priority for climate while clarifying that scientific recommendation shows CDR is also part of an impactful climate action package. Even though nature-based solutions is more popular on its own, the voters did express a both and preference when it comes to using both nature and technology to address climate issues. And finally, we found that only 6% of the surveyed voters have heard of direct air capture, but more have heard of carbon removal. So it can be helpful to discuss this in the context of CDR and talk about a portfolioed approach. And finally, on the messaging, just a very quick note on the messengers. The most trusted messengers by voters surveyed are scientists and those who are seen as guardians of local interests. Project developers are some of the least trusted. So think about building alliances and effectively convey the message across that is rooted in local understanding and context will be helpful. I'm going to switch gears here since I did promise to talk about non-US regulatory landscape for CDR and direct air capture. So I'll talk about Europe here. We've been working in Europe since 2018. In general, the EU has taken a thoughtful but conservative approach to carbon removal. The EU law provides a clear distinction between removal and reduction through the separate 225 megaton removal target by 2030. Even though this target is only accounting for land-based negative emissions, the new communication, which is called the Sustainable Carbon Cycles Communication that was released a couple of days ago, noted a 5 million ton goal from technological removal, so that's BECCS and DAC, by 2030. Given that the current production is less than 1% of that, so there's a long way to go and a lot of opportunities there. And under that umbrella, CDR is then dealt with in different legislative contexts. The most recent communication that I mentioned provides a relatively coherent description of the EU CDR strategy, so I would encourage you to give it a read. Some of the more notable information that may be useful here include: one, a requirement for carbon stocktake, so any tons of CO2 captured, transported, used, and stored needs to be accounted for by origin by 2028. The certification mechanism, which certifies removal that has happened and facilitates credit purchases. It also provides a scientifically robust requirement for MRV, so monitoring, reporting, and verification. And this work will move forward in 2022. The goal, there's a goal of 20% of CO2 used in chemical and plastic products should originate from sustainable non-fossil resources sources by 2030. And on funding, which I know many of us are very interested in, currently the Horizon 2020 program funds some basic research for carbon removal. For example, there's a project called NEGEM that identifies promising and scalable negative emission technology pathways, but support for pilot stage projects are very small in the EU. And this communication referenced future EU Innovation Fund and Horizon Europe calls to cover CO2 transport, storage, DAC, and BECCS. And finally, this document also acknowledged the other challenges to CDR in Europe, which is a lack of CO2 infrastructure, in particular supranational pipelines. And it does request a study for cross-border CO2 infrastructure deployment needs at the regional and the national level to 2030 and beyond. A quick comment on geologic storage. There's the challenge when it comes to geologic storage in Europe is a shortage of existing storage capacity, where small startups may find it difficult to get a seat at the table to procure initially small amount of storage volumes. So for those looking for more information on that, the CCS directive established the legal framework and does cover all geologic formations in the European Economic Area. And on a separate note about off-taking utilization, there is a separate proposal in play that will likely make it into law in some form called the Review EU Aviation. It proposes a 1 to 2% mandate use of e-kerosene by 2030. So that's about a megaton of oil equivalent by 2030 with penalties for non-compliance. And the e-kerosene can be made either through fossil sources or non-fossil sources like direct air capture. And as many of you know, long-haul aviation exclusively relies on fossil fuel today. And there is an emerging effort to ensure that there are some preferences given to direct air capture based fuels by recognizing that it contributes to a circular economy. Okay, so I will end with this slide. Outside of the US and EU, countries are waking up to the need for CDR. China recently signed a joint declaration with the US to cooperate on the deployment of DAC. The mission innovation for CDR sets the goal of 100 million ton a year removal potential by 2030 with Saudi Arabia and Canada. The South Korean government recently released their carbon neutrality roadmap, specifically indicating that indicating they wanted to use removed or captured CO2 to create sustainable fuels for grandfathered cars, and they use direct air capture to recapture that CO2. So I imagine the momentum will continue in 2022, and I encourage you to look beyond the US for opportunities in off-taking and project deployment. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Francis, and thanks to all our speakers today. With that, let's get into the Q&A. So everyone, if you look down at the bottom of your screen, there's an icon that says reactions. From there, you can raise your hand, and that's how I'll be able to sort of see, to call on you to ask the question. So go ahead and raise your hands, and then when I call your name, feel free to get on camera and ask your questions. So the first question is from Perry Goldberg.
Hi, hello everybody. A question for Holly. I'm just curious to hear what's the typical permitting time, whether it's for the EPA or for the two states that you mentioned?
Yep, great question. So the EPA, I don't know if they have a typical permitting time quite established yet. I do think it would be on the scale, if I had to guess, maybe 18 to 24 months. North Dakota says they can do it in 8 months. Wyoming will try to beat North Dakota, but they're a little bit ahead of us in their process on their first one. So I think that would be a good planning time scale for you to think of. So, but for sure, the two states with primacy are going to be faster than going through the EPA. And I didn't mention, but probably should have, that that Louisiana has now applied for Class 6 primacy as well, and several other states are looking at it. So if that's awarded, then that the number of opportunities could grow for as far as states. But you definitely want to focus on the states if you're worried about timing.
Thank you. And then it's also just in terms of the cost. Are you able to say anything on what the average costs are for these permits?
That's a good question. I'm scared to speak out of turn because we're underway right now. But being that we're at a research institution, it will cost us. We're doing subsurface tests as part of a research project, so I think our costs are going to be higher. So I'm not going to answer that, but I think as order of magnitude. I wouldn't say it's not going to be millions, but it's not going to be tens of thousands. So you can kind of guess order of magnitude there probably. So.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. The next question is from Celine. Celine Chow.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, I actually have two questions, if that's okay. So the first one is, when you are calculating our net 1 kiloton capacity, do you take our nominal plant size and subtract it by the emissions that Carbon Direct calculates for us? So for example, what if we have a plant with nominal capacity of 1.5 kiloton, but then after subtraction, we fall a little bit short. Can you comment on what would happen in those cases?
Yeah, great question. So the answer is yes, that's how the calculation works. We do not consider like the 1 kiloton thing isn't necessarily like a firm hard and fast requirement. You know, as long as you're in the right ballpark, that should be fine. So it's like if you're at if you hit 900 or whatever, then you know I think that's a forgivable sin provided you meet all the other requirements of the competition. We are also we'll be feeding back to each team, you know, the results of this exercise so that you have a way to sort of recalibrate things in the next round.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you, Michael. And my second question is, in terms of sequestration, what kind of partnership or documentation are you looking for? Is it okay to say, we've talked to some people, we know these sites would be good for geological sequestration, but we don't have, for example, a contract in place. Would that be okay?
Yeah, as long as you can articulate exactly what your plan is for getting that agreement in place as part of your project plan, that should be sufficient.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay, great. Next question is from Grant Pace.
Hi, so based on what Francis was talking about with the role of CDR in, for example, reducing aviation emissions, I was wondering if the judges of the competition would potentially see that as a viable option, given that as it is right now, there's no way to have carbon negative fuels because anything you combust is going to be emitting things. But is it possible that the judges would be open to CO2 to fuels, given that there would be an immense CO2 emissions reduction through that process?
So from the competition perspective, emissions reductions or offsets are not considered in scope for the competition. So if your project does reduce emissions from another sector or offset emissions from another sector, you could call that a co-benefit, but we're not counting that as removals. Yeah, Holly, do you have anything to add to that? I don't know if you're still with us, Holly.
Sorry, I'm here. I think that was more of a rules question. So I don't think so. I think
yeah.
All right, so I guess I'm next. So how much stress will you guys put, like when you're grading these applications on the megaton, the gigaton portion of the application, on how the technology can be integrated with renewable energies, as well as how you can scale the technology and the renewable energies to the gigatons?
Yeah, again, I'll let Holly comment from her perspective. You know, from my perspective on the prize administration team, we're looking for the teams to have basically think through the issues related to megaton and gigaton scalability. So on the megaton side, what are the key question is like, what are the costs associated with getting a megaton project off the ground? At the gigaton scale, the key question is really about like, well, what issues are going to hinder gigaton scale deployment? And I mean, with regards to your comment specifically about renewables, that's going to be a key piece of most applications, if not all applications. So I think that there's a fair amount of a fair amount of sympathy for that point, but having if you can kind of like explain what those issues are and articulate a plan for how you can overcome some of those issues, that's really fundamentally what we're looking for. Does anyone else want to comment on that?
Yeah, I can comment. I mean, just based on our experience from the last competition, I will say, if your carbon footprint depends and you choose to use energy sources for renewables, then intermittency issues cannot be, they do need to be addressed in a meaningful way. I think that's really serious, and that's was important to us on the last Carbon XPRIZE. So as judges, so I think that's really critical. I will tell you, on the question regarding getting to gigaton scale, I think what we would be, at least what I would be looking for, I can't speak for all the judges, would be fatal flaws. So you really have to, be able to, I guess you don't have to have it all figured out, but you cannot have clear fatal flaws. Let's put it that way.
Thank you.
Okay. Next question is from Will Hesser.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much. This question also pertains to carbon neutral fuels. And so being that they are out of scope for removal, you still need 1,000 tons of carbon removed for phase 2 outside of that. If like electrofuels or biofuels were a byproduct of what you were doing, when it comes to the life cycle emissions intake form, because we have to factor in emissions from, say you have a concrete structure, materials to build out the infrastructure that has to be accounted for, or you have machinery made of steel that you have to replace every 8 years. All of that has to already be accounted for, but can some of those emissions in the leaf be offset by the fact that you are also now reducing emissions in other sectors through carbon neutral fuels?
The short answer is no, not at this round. You basically, any co-product that has a end of life that would suggest that it will be combusted needs to be assumed that it is combusted and counted as an emission. But definitely, if that's what you're doing, like make the case, explain to the judges that that is the nature of your product, and we give you ample opportunity in the submission to explain that. But the point of the competition is basically removals only. We want to see net drawdown is the whole point here. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, next question is from Brittany Zimmerman.
Hello, 2 quick questions for you guys. The first is in regards to the megaton versus gigaton question again. If our first online pilot plant is at the gigaton level, is it okay for us to take all of our analyses from gigaton and put it in to that megaton slot? Or do you want us to take everything that we've done to scale ourselves up to a gigaton and kind of work our way backwards to fill in the megaton space?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, so the premise of the competition is kind of demonstration at a kiloton, cost analysis at the megaton, and then scalability at the gigaton scale. And so at all 3 of those scales, we want to see as much justification as teams can provide. So, I mean, obviously, if you're doing analysis at the gigaton scale, that would be applicable to the megaton scale, right? So I think you can, without knowing the specifics of your project, you can kind of use those cases to support each other. Okay. I think that's fine.
And then the last question, Michael, is with regard to insurance. If we have our key components tested, right? Some of our key components are in university laboratories. Some of our key components are in private laboratories. Mm-hmm. None of those facilities are fully owned by our team, right? They're owned by other groups or institutions. What do you suggest I do on the insurance side of things to make sure I'm doing what, the intent of what you guys are aiming for?
Yeah, so the intent is that any on-the-ground operations need to be covered, and the coverage needs to extend to both your team and the tests themselves. There's a number of ways to skin that cat. You know, you've got a lot of fingers and a lot of pies, and you know, we are very happy to accept like policies from institutions or other organizations that you're working with, provided that you have that, you know, the coverage to cover your team and your demonstration. Yeah.
Okay.
So you know, there's a lot of wiggle room there. You know, we just need to make sure that that should there be an incident, that the team is adequately protected. That's all.
Okay, awesome, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Next question is from Colby Freeman.
Hi, so can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I had a question going back to kind of the idea that teams could come together and like say there's several teams that are capturing carbon, and then all of it is going into the same storage project, the same sequestration area. How would you go about accounting for the emissions associated with building that storage project and splitting those amongst the teams? Is it going to be like a percentage of the storage that is done by the one team, if that makes any sense?
That's a really good question. I don't really have an answer for that. I think that you know, you can kind of take a look at your situation and come up with a best estimate, you know, either a per ton estimate or a per project estimate, you know, and just kind of like outline your rationale and show us how that calculation works. And that's where I'd recommend you start. But you know, to our speakers who are still on the line, like, is there a standard of practice in terms of allocating emissions from a large project to you know, to smaller projects for the purposes of life cycle? There may not be a clear answer on that, so why don't we leave it at that for now?
Suppose we'll all have to figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question is from Thomas Ox.
It's Oaks, but everybody gets it wrong at least the first time. That's not a problem. The question, I don't know if Michael's the right one or who is, but as we're putting our equipment together, you know, we've got a schedule laid out, and we will not be done, or maybe we'll be in process, but not be done by the time the project is completed with the 1,000 tons. Will that be something that you will look at and see the rate at which we are sequestering our carbon dioxide as opposed to the total amount? For instance, if we're up and running with 6 months left to go, and we're running at a rate that is easily at, you know, the 1,000 tons per year, but we haven't sequestered it because, you know, we've been working on fairly complicated equipment over a period of time. Will that be something you will look at, examine, and look at the engineering information and make a judgment as to the rate as opposed to the total quantity?
Yeah, the answer is yes. Now, what you're talking about is you know, in February of 2024, we're going to be taking in another submission and taking a look at where each team is at and assigning site visits. So really the question is what teams are granted a site visit. And I believe the judges are, you know, just my experience with this group, they'll be interested in looking at things in kind of a holistic fashion. But at the end of the day, it really is a competitive process. And so teams that are up and running as of February 2024 will likely get preference. So that's
not my concern. My concern is I expect to be up and running. I've got, you know, things laid out. I actually have a margin just in case, but I expect to be up and running. I expect to be up and running at a variable rate when I want to run. And I expect to be able to demonstrate that I can do the 1,000 tons of air captured CO2. But the complication of the equipment, the installation, supply chain problems that we've got that we're looking at right now, all of those things are going to say it's going to be a squeeze to get it up and running a year ahead of time, which, you know, I mean, that only gives us a year to build things. And instead, we're looking at probably 18 months to build out and, you know, shake down and get running. That would mean I'd only have 6 months of running experience at the time you guys start inspecting. It would not be 1,000 tons at that point. It might be half of that, but the rate would be the thing, you know, from an engineering perspective that I think you might be interested in. Can you just make that clear?
Yeah, the requirement of the competition is we want to see 1,000 tons of removal in the final year. So if that's back end loaded, that's okay. The point is you need to show evidence of operations and give the judges an idea of where you're headed by that February 2024 deadline. And that is a competitive process. So I can't, you know, guarantee things one way or another, but that's our approach.
Okay, next question is from Sebastian Jaramillo.
Yes, hello. My question is about the changes in the legal entity of the team. So during the development of the initial phase of the project, I found a company that has a complete technology and the third-party verification in process of it. But due to intellectual property issues, we will only be able to participate in the carbon removal challenge if we change the actual legal entity from the actual one to the company that we're working with. So how can we do this? How can we change the legal entity and still be able to participate in the phase one of the competition?
Yeah, sure, I can answer that. We can change your legal entity. You just need to contact us with the correct legal entity and who the signatory should be on behalf of that legal entity. It would be an amendment to your current competitor agreement. So it's just something that we can send over to you electronically. We would just need the name of the person to sign, their contact information, their email address, and the correct name of the new legal entity, as well as your team name. So it's a pretty easy switch that we can do.
Okay, do you have any email that I should talk to, or the person, or should I send this information to, or just...
You can send it to carbonremoval@xprize.org, and in the subject line, just say change of legal entity, so we know how to categorize it.
Thanks.
Thank you. Oh, okay, next question we have is from Carbano Blanco.
Hi, everyone. Omar Osorio from Carbon Blanco. Carbon capture is in the public interest now. And I would like to ask if XPRIZE could give us all push or support in order to obtain or in order to talk with this support with maybe authorities or public governments, maybe, in order to obtain some facilities, some help for everyone to develop our strategies. So it could be great if you say something, maybe public or maybe for all participant support to create this possibility with some authorities. So That's the question. So could you give us some support?
Yeah,
possible?
yeah,
Well,
I
not for-
appreciate the question and really the suggestion. This is the sort of thing that we like to do, and it's something that we're considering doing next year for the, once the milestone round is complete, we'll really shift our focus to trying to facilitate all of you in building your scaled up operations. So, if anyone out there is associated with either jurisdictions or projects that are trying to, aggregate DAC providers or any other kind of carbon capture providers, we'd love to help you spread the word and connect you with the teams here. So, I'm just gonna, we got to punt the ball a little bit into next year, but it's definitely something we're interested in.
And another one is together maybe. It's about the branding that we could use to say that we are under this competence and maybe this used for our objective. So what can I do? What can?
Sorry, I just missed the question. Can you repeat that?
Sorry, it's about the branding that we could as a teams use. So it's going to be easy for everyone to say, okay, we are in this under the competence, so we would like to obtain some facilities, some help to prepare the best as possible to present for you the information and the supports that you could check. No? So what kind of branding? So we are in this competence, but what can we say about that publicly?
Yeah, good question. I believe, Nikki, you might have the answer for this if you're on here, but I believe we have a like a guideline for with branding considerations and some language that you can use around the competition. I think you can find it on the resources tab in POP.
Yes,
Roopa, can you confirm
that's
that?
correct. If you have a POP account, which everyone here should, since you're all registered teams, log in and there's a resources tab. We have a tools and comms section of that resources tab that will have a guideline that our marketing team has prepared that will guide you on how to brand yourself and represent yourself as part of the competition. So, okay. So I just want to just mention, we'd really like to focus on questions for our speakers today, specifically directed to our air track speakers. I know there's tons of questions from all of you, but we would like to focus on that today. We do have office hours coming up next Tuesday that we will have weekly until the submission deadline of February 1st. The information on how to join those is on our website under the upcoming events and webinars page. So please, we really want to reserve this time we have for our air track speakers. Okay, so the next question up is from Ted Von Hippel.
Hi, Roopa, thanks. This question may actually be for Holly and for you, but I know Holly just signed out. And that is that the DAC technology and the sequestration technology are really different things. So teams on here will be working either on one or the other and have to work with each other. So is the competition set up, or would the competition be set up so that one DAC team could pair with more than one carbon sequestration team and vice versa? There's also sort of geographical reasons to do that because DAC may be done in many places around the world, as so will carbon sequestration.
There's no prohibition to that in the competition, but what we want to do is have each team entity should have its own pathway. So if you have multiple varying pathways, then you should register multiple teams and have multiple submissions. But if you kind of have one pathway that's being demonstrated in a variety of different locations with a variety of different actors involved, that's totally fine.
Thank you.
Okay, next question is from Cars to Trees.
Hi, this is Amir. I'm from Cars to Trees. I have a question for Michael. Actually, we in Cars to Trees, we have a project that it's disassembly going to mount on each car. And we're following the Climeworks technology in capture, the DAC, which is direct air capture. The problem we have, for sure, I had this one in the previous meeting, we won't be ready for the first phase because we don't have any prototype. All the time we spend is for digital demonstration right now. When I say digital, I'm talking about the ANSYS, SolidWorks, and our PTC. We put all the data captured very correctly in the engineering softwares, and we have a visualization for everything on our assembly on the car, and we are collecting lots of data, but unfortunately is not enough for the first milestone. But still we're going to submit our plan for this because we want to have some assessment on our plan. But the problem we have, and the question I have, how we can have access to a verifier, and because the company or any organization that we need to reach them as a verifier or to have spend time to for verification on our plan, they're not answering any email, they're not answering the phone, and I don't know how to reach them. For example, especially Climeworks, and right now I send a direct message to Francis from Climeworks as well. I sent a bunch of email because we didn't innovate the wheel again. We're using whatever direct air capture is available. We customize that as a mobile platform, which is able to install on each car. And each car, as a Cars to Trees means the car is going to change to equal with the 450 trees to capture the CO2 during the year, and all the resources available. I don't want to go through the details for that, but nobody as a verifier or as a mentor or as somebody that just give us some idea that we are going in the right direction or not. They're not give us any answer. They not pick up their phone. They don't answer the email, and that's a big challenge we are faced with. For next phase, we are going with our own pocket to start to making the prototype, very simplified prototype based on the BOM we created right now. In the digital model, we create all BOM, bill of material, and all the design, all the print, everything modeled, everything is ready, and we are starting the prototyping for next phase. Probably for grand milestone we're going to be there, but for first phase no, because of time. But how's the XPRIZE going to recommend or support some company? We are not company as well, we are a team, we are the engineering team working in this idea. How we can get access to verifier or some mentor mentoring support?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts there. So the first point is, and this is for everybody. If you're not in a position to do a demonstration that meets the phase 1 requirements, that's okay. You're more than welcome to participate in phase 2 and compete for the grand prize. So don't feel like you're being cut out of the competition if you're not in a position to submit to phase 1. So that's totally fine. Regarding the verifiers or onboarding mentors, I can't be of much help there. It really is up to each team to find the appropriate people to partner with or work with or hire, both to provide advice and to provide verification. I'll just note that I wouldn't encourage teams to reach out to other developers to verify their equipment. Verification needs to be by a third party who was not involved in the design of that equipment. And there are lots of engineering companies and engineering consultants who would be in a position to help you there. I don't have a list off of hand, and it's really up to you to find those people. So just encourage you to keep going. I guess the other resources I could point out are There are some good groups online which have a lot of experts in the space hanging out on them. The Air Miners Slack channels are a really good one. Somebody also set up a Discord channel, a Discord server for the competition. And there are some others out there. There's a CDR group on Google Groups and things like that. So you could leverage those other forums to try and help find mentors, partners, verifiers, that sort of thing.
So sorry, just very quick. Do we have any support, any line that with that line we can introduce ourselves better to this mentors, that they pay attention to the plan we are, because the verifying this plan, for example, our plan, I'm talking about my plan, it's very simple because everything is already there. Every engineering model there, every data collected, all the CFD, all the ANSYS analyzed, everything is there, and we just need somebody pay attention to us.
Yeah,
but
I understand.
Is there anything from XPRIZE to can help us in that?
I can't give you any help right now. In the new year, we are going to be planning some sessions around pitching to investors and things like that, and so those sessions might help you hone your pitch a little bit. But we also have really, if you look at the partners for XPRIZE carbon removal, we have partnerships with other incubators and other organizations who are have resources to help you refine your pitch and do that. So I could point you in that direction.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for the questions.
Okay, next question we have is from Elizabeth.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My question is regarding the third-party verification. Just real quick, I have a question about that. Let's say you have someone who is deemed to be an expert and you want them to verify, and they're not a part of the XPRIZE preliminary, the milestone competition. Let's say they were, and I decided to use them as a third-party verifier. Let's say they decide to register for the grand prize. Would that be a conflict of interest, or would that still be okay for this?
No, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. We've tried to define we have two requirements for verifiers. They have to be qualified and independent, and we've tried to articulate those fairly clearly in the checklists that we've issued. But one note on independence. That doesn't necessarily mean they have to be independent of the competition. They have to be independent of your team and your technology. So even if they are actively competing in the competition on another team or working with another team, that's totally fine, provided they're independent of your team and your technology. Any other potential conflicts of interest within that are really up to you to manage, but that's not XPRIZE's concern.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Next question we have is from Kevin Klaus.
Hi. Our question is, if we have a cheaper way than the standardized cost to get electricity, for example, if we make it ourselves, or if we have a contract with a cheaper green electricity provider, can we use our actual costs in the calculation?
For this round, we'd like all of the teams to use the standardized costs that we've provided. However, you should note that in the comments that you have a cheaper source. That's my first piece of advice. The second piece of advice is we've also asked you to do a sensitivity analysis around a few of the parameters that are the key drivers to your cost. And so that cost of electricity might be a good factor to highlight in the sensitivity analysis, so you can show the effect of that lower electricity price on the overall price of carbon removal.
Okay. And if we, for example, if we make it ourselves, the electricity, and let's say we build a wind turbine, does that fall under the electricity cost, or can we just calculate the cost of the turbine in our included in our calculations?
Well, anything that you build would need to be accounted for as capital costs. So again, so capital costs are another great place to include in your sensitivity analysis. There would be some operating costs that you'd want to include there. The approach that we took in the calculation of the standardized cost is those costs are an LCOE figure. So you can look up references on how that stands for levelized cost of electricity. And if you follow those standards to calculate your own LCOE, that's fine. But, and this is very important, you must account for intermittency in your plans. If you're building especially renewable capacity on your site, you have to be able to articulate how that intermittency is accommodated. That means either your whole facility needs to have a capacity factor that reflects that intermittency, or you have to have some way of providing energy during the downtime, whether that's pulling off the grid, which is totally fine, or implementing battery storage, or some even diesel generation is fine as long as you account for the costs and the emissions associated with that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, question from Ashley Chi. Next.
Hi, can you hear me as Ashley?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, my name is Ashley Steve. I wish I had Ashley's name. Sorry. So at any rate, we have a couple of questions. If I could just very briefly say that if you just think of our thing as a black box, what we are building artificial lichens. Lichens, obviously, since they're an amalgam of both a fungus and an algae, they have algae in them. Algae have the talent of being able to fix carbon, and we rely on that. We basically treat this as a barium. We stack these things up in old used shipping containers that are a meter cube. We basically build big, large terrariums that are stackable and scalable. And the reason I'm going into that detail is I'm really struggling with figuring out what DAC really means, what direct air means, whether it's the direct air. For instance, inside my terraria, all I really need is about 20,000 parts per million. I don't want anyone that's toxic to algae, too much of that. But if I just stack those, let's just say, stack those next to a biomass conversion facility, there's plenty of CO2 around ambient-wise. Is that DAC? I'm not hooked up to a point source. Is that DAC? Is my first question.
Yeah, that's fine. No issues from my perspective. We do not treat, I mean, we're asking you to sort of self-identify in a particular track in your submission. The reason we do that is so that we can make sure that we get the right experts looking at your proposal. But all the teams are competing with all the other teams. So if you kind of misidentify yourself or whatever, we'll just reroute you internally. So that's, I don't want anyone to be stressed out about which pathway they indicate in their submission.
Okay, I'm not sure exactly how, but anyway, what you said was very important to me. In other words, what I just described to you, just independently stacking black boxes that do the up in and around a biomass conversion facility is not a problem. Now, if I were then to stick that pipe in from the biomass conversion facility, non-petroleum based, and stick that into the black box.
Yeah, you kind of cut out there, but I think you're asking about whether you can consume CO2 from a facility that combusts biomass. Is that right?
Yes.
So that's fine, provided you can account for basically the cultivation, the growth and cultivation of the biomass has to be a part of your system. So you need to be able to account for the cost, emissions, and sustainability associated with the source of the biomass. But in terms of scope, that's totally fine.
So if our biomass conversion facility is integral to the plant, and we're burning walnuts in the San Joaquin Valley, then we're. So I have one more question, and it relates to the biomass. Our system actually generates as its byproduct cellulose, just like. What I'm trying to noodle out. Obviously, we all agree that cellulose, as it stands in a tree at 30 years old, is a suitable 100-year sequestration mechanism. We can argue about that, but everybody's pretty comfortable with that. If instead of the cellulose coming from a tree, and we harvest it on a regular basis, is there any reason why that you know cellulose from, say, cellulosic sources or other kinds of sources differently, or do we have to go up and prove out? Do we have to do some sort of weathering study? I guess that's what with word cellulose that comes not from trees. Remember, bacterial. Need to come up with a study.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's not a question that I think that I can answer. That's a little bit too in the weeds, and I'm not an expert on that specific question. So just try to answer your question generally. You know, when it comes to the durability of your sequestered CO2, or even the durability of call them byproducts or co-products of your system, be prepared to provide justification. You know, academic justification is okay. Experimental justification is probably better. Just kind of do your due diligence in terms of making that case. At that point in the game, when the judges are reading this, it's about giving them confidence that you know what's going on, that you have control over your process, and that you can tell us with certainty what the key performance parameters of your system are.
Well, that's good. So the only thing I'll cap off, I don't want to dominate this, is that I have access to material testing things. So I don't know if I can get it done by February 1st, so that's my problem. As far as the sequestration portion of what we have to first, how far down the pipe does that have to have traveled?
For February 1st, we don't require demonstrations that are full in scope or full in scale. The demonstrations can be subsets of your overall system. So you need to be able to articulate your plan for how you're going to build that out over the next couple of years. But in terms of the actual demonstrated component, it's really your choice about how far down the rabbit hole to go. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Good luck, everybody.
Thank you. Okay, we have time for one more question because, as promised, the next part of this session is going to be breakouts. So the next question is from Peggy Bradley, and the last question will be from Peggy Bradley.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. My question is to Michael, and it has to do with the 1,000-ton proof that the judges will come and look at our sites. The question I have has to do with our solution. A lot of the carbon that we're sequestering is going to be in forests or in trees. And 2 years within a cycle, those forests are not producing the type of tons of CO2 they will later. And in other words, the first 10 years of a forest, it's not really very productive. And so to allow a forest solution to be in the competition, if we can take our 100-year cycle and divide it up into 100 years, saying that we're sequestering that much, in other words, another way of accounting for our first 10 years, it would allow us to be in the competition.
You know, we're committed to trying to make sure that everybody who's doing real carbon removals can compete in this competition. So historically, like especially towards the end of the competition, when we're dealing with selecting folks for site visits, our general practice is to work with teams very closely to make sure that we do verification that is tailored to the nature of demonstration. So I just want to kind of give you that assurance that we're happy to work with you on that. However, the requirements of the competition are clear in the guidelines, and we can't deviate from those. So it is up to each team to come up with a system that meets those requirements too. So I'm answering your question generally. I don't know enough about what you're saying to kind of say yes or no, and I'd be loath to do that anyways. I don't want to, my role isn't to pass judgment on any teams, but to help communicate the requirements of the competition. So I hope that's kind of a helpful answer, even if it kind of beats around the bush of the question.
I think it's a matter of accounting, in other words, whether we take what we're going to do in 100 years and divide it up into 100 units, or whether we actually tell you how much we were able to put in the ground that year. I think it's important because IPCC sees forests as one of our biggest opportunities. In other words, so if all it would really need is to be able to account in terms of how much we're going to do in 100 years, every year in those first 2 years, and that solves the problem.
All I can say is make that case in your submission.
Okay.
We want to see you compete. We want to see you win. Read the guidelines very carefully and make your best case.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is all the time we have for questions.